3 days after my surgery, I was working on a crossword puzzle. That is the kind of detail that matters, not because crossword puzzles are dramatic, but because it tells you exactly where I was. I was not confused. I was not disoriented. I was not drifting in and out of consciousness. I was 71 years old, 3 days post-hip replacement, sitting up in my hospital bed at Riverside Methodist Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, with a cup of lukewarm tea on the tray beside me and a paperback crossword book open on my lap, trying to remember a 7-letter word for a body of standing water because I kept wanting to write lagoon, and that was only 6. My surgeon, Dr. Patricia Russ, had been in that morning. She checked the incision, reviewed my physical therapy notes, and told me I was recovering well. My blood pressure was good. My pain was manageable. She expected to discharge me within the week, with home physical therapy to follow. I want to stop here for a moment and tell you something, because it matters to everything that follows. I was not a confused old woman lying helpless in a hospital bed. I was a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher who had just had a planned surgery and was recovering exactly on schedule. I had eaten breakfast. I had completed my morning exercises. I had spoken clearly and at length with my surgeon, my physical therapist, and 2 different nurses. My mind was sharp. My memory was working. I knew what day it was, I knew where I was, and I was doing a crossword puzzle because that is what I do in the mornings when I have time to sit still. I was thinking about my garden on Elmwood Drive. I was thinking about the hydrangeas I hadn't cut back yet before the fall. I was thinking about the yellow chair by the kitchen window where I always drink my first cup of coffee. I was thinking about going home. Then the door opened. Leonard came in first. My son is 43 years old. He has his father Robert's height and his father's hands, broad, capable hands that always reminded me of someone who works with them, even though Leonard is an engineer who works at a desk. He was wearing his dark green jacket, the one I bought him for Christmas 3 years ago. His hands were in his pockets. He was not smiling. His wife Ashley came in behind him. She was dressed the way she always dresses, like she is attending a meeting where decisions will be made. Cream blouse, dark slacks pressed clean, her hair pulled back smooth and tight. She was carrying a manila folder under one arm, and she walked into my hospital room the way a person walks into a room they believe belongs to them. I set down my crossword book. I said, "Well, good morning. I wasn't expecting you both this early." Ashley didn't say good morning back. She pulled the chair to my bedside, the vinyl visitor's chair that someone on the previous shift had pushed to the far wall, and she sat down and placed the folder across her knee with the deliberate care of a person who has rehearsed this moment. Leonard drifted to the window. He stood with his back half turned to me, looking out at the parking lot below, as though the cars down there were suddenly of great interest. Something shifted in the room. I have been a teacher.
"Jackie, we've been talking and we've made a decision. We are moving you to a facility next week, and we will be taking over management of your bank accounts."
I looked at her, I looked at Leonard's back, I looked at her again. I kept my voice even. I said, "Who authorized this decision?" She opened the folder. Inside were printed pages, several of them, some with sections highlighted in yellow. She tapped one with her finger, the gesture of a person who wants you to understand they have done their research. "We are in the process of having you declared legally incompetent," she said. "Until that process is finalized, Leonard has agreed to act as your financial manager. You don't have a say in this because you are not in a position to make sound decisions for yourself. The best thing you can do right now is comply and hand over access to your finances." The room was very quiet. I could hear the low sound of the hallway, a cart rolling past, someone's television 2 rooms over, the distant beeping of a machine, the ordinary sounds of a hospital going about its work, indifferent to the conversation happening in room 214. I looked at Leonard. He was studying the parking lot. I said, "Leonard." He turned, but his eyes went to the floor between us. I looked back at Ashley. My hands were folded in my lap. My voice did not waver. I said, "I'd like to know how long you've been planning this." She said, "We've been concerned about you for some time." I said, "That is not what I asked." From the doorway, I became aware of it only then, because the door was standing ajar. I could see a figure in the hall. My nurse, Donna Prewitt. She was tall, broad-shouldered, 58 years old with a manner that said she had seen everything this hospital had to offer and very little of it surprised her anymore. She was not walking past. She was standing still, her arms at her sides, listening. Ashley was still speaking. She was describing the facility, a place in Dublin called Meadowbrook Commons. She said it had a lovely memory care wing. She said Leonard would take over management of my pension deposits, my savings account, my monthly bills. She said I would be given a personal spending allowance. She used the word allowance. She actually used that word for small purchases. She said the house on Elmwood Drive would need to be reassessed going forward. When she said the word house, I felt something settle in me, not anger, certainty, the specific clarity that comes when you finally understand exactly what you're dealing with. I reached for my iPad on the bedside table. I found the recording. I pressed, before I tell you what was on that recording, I need to make sure you understand who I am, because this story is not just about what happened to me. It is about the kind of woman it happened to and why that matters. My name is Jackie Lewis. I was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1953. My parents were Dorothy and Earl Simmons. Earl worked at the National Cash Register plant. Dorothy kept a spotless house and sang in the church choir every Sunday for 40 years. They were not wealthy people, but they were steady people, and they taught me that steadiness is its own kind of wealth. I got my education degree from Ohio State in 1975. I started teaching 6th grade English at Bexley Middle School in Columbus the following year, and I did not stop for 31 years. If you know anything about middle schoolers, you know that teaching 6th grade requires a particular combination of patience, authority, humor, and genuine affection for human beings at their most awkward and uncertain. I had all of those things. I loved that job. I loved the people my students became. I still hear from some of them. I want to say something about what 31 years of teaching does to a person. It teaches you to read a room. It teaches you to tell the difference between a child who is struggling and a child who is performing. It teaches you to sit quietly and wait for the truth to surface rather than forcing it. It teaches you that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most honest one, and that the children who cause the least trouble often carry the heaviest loads. Those skills do not leave you when you retire. They become part of how you see the world. I met Robert Lewis at a teachers' conference in 1978. He taught high school chemistry. He was tall and quiet and had a way of explaining complicated things simply that I found irresistible then and would give anything to hear again now. We married in 1980. We bought the house on Elmwood Drive in 1983, 4 bedrooms, a small backyard, a kitchen with east-facing windows that catch the morning light in a way that still makes me stop sometimes and simply look. Robert planted a dogwood tree in the backyard the spring we moved in. He said a yard without a flowering tree wasn't a yard, it was just grass. Every April when that tree blooms pink and white, I stand at the kitchen window and I feel him there. After 45 years, the grief is not sharp anymore. It is simply woven into everything. We had 2 children, Leonard, born in 1981, and Renee, born in 1984. When Robert died of a sudden heart attack in 1995, Leonard was 14, Renee was 11. I became a widow with 2 children in school, a mortgage, and a teacher's salary. I did not fall apart. I want to be very clear about that, not because falling apart would have been shameful, but because understanding how I handled that period of my life is essential to understanding what I did in that hospital room. I have never been a woman who waits to be rescued. I have never been a woman who hands her life over to someone else and trusts that they will handle it well. I have always been the one who handles things. I worked double shifts in the summers, tutoring and doing supplementary coursework instruction. I refinanced the house once at a better rate and then paid it down steadily, extra payment every year without exception. I drove that Buick until the doors were a different shade from the body because a car is not a statement, it is transportation. I bought my children's school clothes at the beginning of every August, and I made sure they had what they needed for their activities, and I never once made them feel the weight of what it cost me. Leonard graduated from Ohio State. Renee graduated from Vanderbilt. I sat in both graduation audiences, and I cried both times, and I was not embarrassed about it at all. I paid off the house on Elmwood Drive in 2014. That was the year I retired. I remember standing in the kitchen the day the final mortgage payment cleared and thinking, I did it. Everything Robert and I started together, I finished. I had no debt. I had a teacher's pension of reasonable size. I had a savings account I had been building for 30 years. I had a house that was entirely mine. When you understand that woman, the woman who worked double shifts and drove the Buick and never asked anyone to rescue her, you understand why what happened in that hospital room was not simply an inconvenience. It was an attempt to strip a woman of everything she had spent a lifetime building. And it failed. The changes began slowly. That is always how it begins. Leonard met Ashley Greer at a work conference in Chicago when he was 38. She was a project coordinator at a construction management firm. She was organized, polished, decisive, qualities I genuinely admire. When Leonard brought her to Elmwood Drive for the first time, she shook my hand firmly and looked me directly in the eye and asked thoughtful questions about my years in the classroom. She complimented the house. She helped clear the dinner plates without being asked. I was impressed. We got along well in the beginning. There were Sunday dinners and holiday visits and the ordinary warm texture of a growing family. When they married 2 years after they met, I sat in the front row at the vineyard outside Cincinnati and I cried the good kind of tears. My friend Carol Simmons leaned over during the reception and whispered, "She's a lot, isn't she?" I told her to hush. I said she was just being protective. I thought Carol was seeing things that weren't there. Carol was not seeing things that weren't there. Carol simply saw them before I was willing to. The first thing I noticed was the group chat. Leonard and I had shared a 2-person text thread for years. Just the two of us, silly videos, check-ins during the week, the kind of low-stakes ongoing conversation that keeps a relationship warm between visits. When he married Ashley, the thread expanded to include her, which was natural. She was family. But within a few months, the nature of the conversation shifted. Leonard began responding less. If I asked him a question, Ashley would answer. If I mentioned something I was worried about, a medical appointment, a problem with the furnace, Ashley would reply with links to senior services websites or articles about planning for the future. I had not asked for planning advice. I had mentioned a leaky furnace. Then came the calendar. Ashley worked from home and kept a rigorous schedule, and she asked that family visits be coordinated in advance using a shared online calendar that Leonard sent me a link to. I want to be fair here, this is not inherently unreasonable. People with busy lives need to plan. But I had been dropping by my son's house with a pot of soup or a plate of cookies for his entire adult life, and now I needed to submit a calendar request by Thursday for a Sunday dinner. The warmth of the unannounced visit, the spontaneity of a mother and son who simply wanted to see each other, was being scheduled out of the relationship. I adjusted. I did not complain. I did not want to be the difficult mother-in-law. I also want to say something here for the women watching who are in the early stages of something like this, something that feels wrong but is too small to name. I want to say, name it anyway, write it down, tell a friend. The things that feel like small inconveniences when they are isolated become something else entirely when you look at the pattern. I had a calendar request for Sunday dinners. I had redirected conversations. I had a group chat that had shifted its character. Individually, any one of those things is explainable. Together, they were a blueprint. I did not see the blueprint until later. But the women who stayed in my classroom all those years, the ones who eventually figured out what was happening to them at home or in their friendships or in their marriages, they always said the same thing afterward. The signs were there. I just kept explaining them away. I am asking you not to explain them away. Then I began to notice that when I did visit, I was never alone with Leonard. Not really. Ashley was always in the room or passing through or redirecting the conversation. If Leonard and I started to drift toward the back porch, the way we used to sit out there after dinner and just talk, something would come up. A question that needed Leonard's input, a task that required both of them, a phone call. I am not saying it was always deliberate, but the pattern was consistent and the result was the same. After 3 years of marriage, I had not had a genuine one-on-one conversation with my son that lasted longer than 10 minutes. I mentioned it once, gently on a phone call when I was certain Ashley was not nearby. Leonard said I was imagining things. He said Ashley just liked being included. He said she was still getting comfortable with family dynamics. He said she meant well. I let it go. The fall happened on a Thursday in late October. I was on my back porch steps with a laundry basket. Front steps would have been wiser, but the back door was closer to the laundry room, and I was thinking about something else entirely, and my left hip gave way without warning. I went down on the concrete steps, and I knew before I even finished falling that something was wrong, real wrong. The sound alone told me. My neighbor Frank Caldwell was raking leaves in his yard next door, and he saw me go down. Frank is 67 years old, a retired postal worker, one of those people who is simply quietly present in the way that good neighbors are. He called 911 immediately. He came over the fence, literally climbed over the low section near the garage, and sat with me on the cold concrete and held my hand until the paramedics arrived. He also called Leonard because Leonard's number was on the neighborhood watch contact list. The ambulance came. The x-rays confirmed a hip fracture. Surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. What I did not know, what Frank would tell me weeks later, after everything had come out, was that Ashley called a real estate agent named Marcus Webb within 48 hours of my fall. I was in pre-op preparation when that phone call happened. She asked for a preliminary market assessment for a property on Elmwood Drive. Frank found out because Marcus Webb attended the same church as Frank's wife, Gloria. Marcus had felt strange about the call, a daughter-in-law calling to assess her mother-in-law's property before the woman had even had her surgery. He mentioned it to Gloria, who mentioned it to Frank. Frank didn't say anything to me right away because he wasn't sure what he was looking at yet, but he started writing things down. A retired postal worker who writes things down turns out to be a very useful person to have next door. I want to take you back into that room. Ashley had finished explaining the plan, the facility, the finances, the allowance, the house. She had laid it all out with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed it, and she was sitting in that chair with the folder on her knee, watching me with an expression that was not unkind but was very, very certain. I had not yet reached for the iPad. I want to describe what happened in those minutes because they matter. Leonard was still at the window. I said his name again, not sharply, not accusingly, just directly. "Leonard, come over here and look at me." He turned, he walked the 3 steps from the window to the foot of my bed. He stood there with his hands still in his pockets, and he looked at me, and I could see on his face something I recognized. I had seen it before on students of mine, 12-year-olds who had agreed to something they didn't fully understand and were now standing in the middle of the consequence of it, and discovering it felt different than they had imagined. He looked guilty, not remorseful, not yet, that would come later, but guilty in the specific way of a person who knew, somewhere, that what he was participating in was wrong. I said to Ashley, "Has anyone spoken to Dr. Russ, my surgeon? Has anyone actually called her and discussed—"
We don't need a doctor's formal evaluation to begin this process. There are legal mechanisms that allow family members to take protective action when they observe a pattern of concern.
I said, "What pattern? What specifically have you observed?" She said.
You've had moments of confusion, Leonard has noticed.
I looked at my son. Have I? His mouth opened, it closed. He looked at the floor. Here is what I want you to understand about that moment. I was not confused. I was not frightened. I was very, very clear. But I also knew that clarity alone is not enough. There are systems in the world, legal systems, medical systems, that can be manipulated by people who are organized and determined. I had enough sense to know that what Ashley was attempting required documentation, not just indignation. And then I became aware of Donna. Donna Pruitt had been my nurse for 3 days. She was 58 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of steady presence you develop after 30 years of working in hospital rooms with sick people and frightened families and the full spectrum of human behavior. She was not a woman who was easily disturbed, but in the doorway of room 214, she was standing absolutely still, and her face had a set to it that I recognized as controlled anger. She had heard everything. She said from the doorway, "Mrs. Lewis, would you like me to call the patient advocate?" A patient advocate is a hospital staff member whose specific job is to protect patients' rights, including the right to refuse unwanted medical or placement decisions, the right to be involved in decisions about your own care, and the right not to be pressured by family members into choices you haven't made. Ashley turned, her expression shifted very slightly. She said, "That won't be necessary. This is a family matter." Donna said, "Mom," she did not move. I am telling you this because Donna Pruitt is one of the heroes of this story, and I want her recognized. She did not need to intervene. She could have walked past. She was on a shift. She had other patients. She had charts to update. But she stood in that doorway and she held the line. And later, I found out she had already typed a note into my chart at that point, documenting the conversation she had witnessed. Let me tell you exactly how that recording came to exist. When Dr. Russ prepared me for surgery, she went through a thorough post-operative care list. One of the items she mentioned was keeping a recovery journal. She said that patients who tracked their daily progress, pain levels, medication timing, sleep quality, appetite, mood, tended to have better outcomes because they could identify patterns and communicate clearly with their care team. She said many patients find it easier to do short voice recordings than to write, especially when hand strength or energy is low. I started recording the morning after surgery. Short entries, very practical. Day 1 post-op. Pain level about a 5 this morning. Had the oatmeal for breakfast. Physical therapist came at 7. We did 2 sets of ankle pumps and straight leg raises. Slept better than I expected. That kind of thing. Medical documentation, nothing more. 2 nights before the confrontation, Ashley and Leonard visited in the early evening. I had been given my pain medication about an hour before they arrived, and by the time they had been in the room for 20 minutes, I was fighting to keep my eyes open. That happens with that particular medication. It is not a heavy sedative, but it makes you drowsy, and after surgery, your body is already spending its energy on healing. I drifted. I was not fully asleep, but I was not fully present either. I was in that in-between state where you can still hear voices, but you are not able to make yourself respond to them. I had left my iPad recording on the bedside table. Ashley and Leonard talked for over an hour, believing I was asleep. They kept their voices low, not whispering, but the careful quiet of people who are being considerate of someone sleeping nearby. They were not aware that consideration was, in that moment, their undoing. I did not listen to the recording that night. I was genuinely asleep by the time they left. I listened to it the next morning before anyone arrived, while the breakfast tray was still on my table and the hallway was just beginning to fill with the sounds of the morning shift. I heard Ashley's voice first. She was speaking with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who has thought through a plan and is satisfied with it. She said, "She's not going to fight it if we move fast. Once she's placed in the facility, the isolation does the work for us. She won't have the energy or the resources to contest anything, and by the time Renee finds out, it will already be processed." I heard Leonard's voice. Quieter, less certain, he said, "What about the house?" Ashley said, "The house comes after. We demonstrate diminished capacity first, establish the power of attorney, and then the property decision follows naturally." I spoke to a lawyer in late September. He said that for someone her age who has had a significant health event, the process is more straightforward than people think. We document a few observed incidents, we have 2 family witnesses, and we file. "It doesn't take long," Leonard said. "She's going to be angry." Ashley said, "She can be angry. Once the process is started, her anger doesn't change the legal standing. And honestly, Leonard, we are doing her a favor. She can't manage that house forever. She can't manage her finances indefinitely. We're getting ahead of something that would have happened anyway, and we're making sure it happens on our terms instead of in a crisis." A pause. Then Leonard, very quietly, "She paid for everything herself. That house is hers." Ashley, brisk, "And it will continue to be technically. We're not taking it, we're managing it on her behalf. That's what the legal structure is for." I stopped the recording. I sat in my hospital bed for a full 5 minutes and I did not move. I was processing what I had heard, not just the words, but the structure of it, the timeline. The lawyer consulted in September, the real estate agent, the few observed incidents that would need to be documented. This was not an impulsive decision made out of fear for my well-being. This was a plan. It had been in development for months. I forwarded the audio file to 3 people immediately. I sent it to Renee with a voice message explanation. "Keep your phone on. I need you to listen to this and then call me." I sent it to Carol Simmons with a text. "Call me when you can. Something has happened and I need your legal eyes on it." And I sent it to Frank Caldwell with a note. "Frank, you were right to write things down. Please send everything you have to my attorney, Carol Simmons. Her number is in your address book from the neighborhood watch list." Then I put the iPad back on the table. And when Ashley came in that morning and began her presentation, I let her finish. I let her say every word. I let her make her case completely, because I wanted the full performance on the record. When I pressed play in that room, and Ashley's own voice came through those speakers saying, "The isolation does the work for us," I watched my daughter-in-law's face change in a way I will not soon forget. It went from controlled certainty to something I had never seen on her face before, something that looked for just a moment like fear. Leonard made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and turned away from the window. Donna was still in the doorway. I said very calmly, "This recording has already been sent to my daughter, my attorney, and my neighbor. I want you both to leave this room now." Ashley closed the folder. She stood up. She said nothing. Leonard followed her to the door, and then at the threshold, he stopped. He turned back and looked at me. His eyes were wet. He opened his mouth. I shook my head slightly, and he understood, and he left. The door closed. Donna came fully into the room. She sat in the chair Ashley had just vacated, and she put her hand over mine on the blanket, and she said, "I already called the patient advocate before I came in." "She's on her way," I said. "Thank you, Donna." She said, "Don't thank me, you handled that yourself." Renee called me back within 20 minutes of receiving the audio file. She had clearly already been crying, but by the time she was on the phone with me, her voice was steady and practical, which is Renee in a crisis. She does the crying first and the organizing second, and she is very efficient at both. She said, "I'm booking a flight." I said, "You don't have to do that today." She said, "Mom, I'm booking a flight." Renee was at Columbus John Glenn Airport by 3 in the afternoon. She came straight to the hospital with her carry-on bag still over her shoulder, and she walked into my room and sat down in the chair beside my bed, and she held my hand for a full, quiet minute before she said anything at all. Then she said, "Tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. Carol Simmons arrived at 4:30. Carol is the kind of person you want in your corner when things are serious, not because she is aggressive, but because she is precise. She has been practicing elder law in Columbus for over 20 years, and she has seen a great deal of what can happen to older women when the people around them begin treating their assets as an inheritance that hasn't been officially distributed yet. She walked into my room in her good gray blazer with her reading glasses on top of her head and her legal pad under her arm, and she kissed me on the cheek and she said, "Play me the recording." I played it. She listened without interrupting. When it finished, she wrote something on her legal pad and underlined it twice. She said, "Jackie, this is exactly what Ohio law calls elder financial exploitation." What she described, establishing a false incompetency, filing in order to gain control of your property and finances, that is not gray area. That is the statute. She also said something I want every woman watching to write down. The reason we're in a good position right now is because of what you did in 2019. The reason you're protected today is decisions you made years ago. She was talking about the documents. I'll come back to those. Frank Caldwell texted me that evening. He had compiled everything, the dates of Ashley's communications with Marcus Webb, Marcus Webb's account of the phone call, and a log he had been keeping since the fall of what he described as unusual activity. Ashley coming by the house on Elmwood Drive twice while I was in the hospital, spending time in the backyard, photographing the exterior with her phone. He was a retired postal worker. He had a systematic mind and a methodical habit. His notes were dated, timed, and detailed. He wrote at the end of his message, "I didn't say anything sooner because I didn't know if I was seeing something or nothing. Now I know." I wrote back, "Send everything to Carol." He wrote back, "Already done." The patient advocate, a woman named Teresa Morgan, came by at 5 o'clock. She reviewed the chart notes Donna had entered, spoke with me for 40 minutes, and made her own documentation. She told me that if Ashley attempted to initiate any formal proceeding related to my competency or my financial management, the hospital was obligated to ensure I had independent legal representation before any such process could involve my medical records. The net was closing around Ashley's plan, and she did not know it yet. I want to pause here and say something about what made all of this possible. It was not a dramatic rescue. Nobody swooped in. Nobody fought a battle on my behalf. Renee got on a plane because she knew me and trusted me. Carol came because we had been friends for 38 years and because I had called her. Frank Caldwell spoke up because he had been paying attention. Donna Pruitt stood in that doorway because she was the kind of nurse who understood that her job was to protect patients, and that protection sometimes looked like standing still and witnessing. These people were in my life because I had shown up for them. I had been a good friend to Carol for nearly 4 decades. I had been a reliable, honest neighbor to Frank. I had been a patient who treated Donna with genuine respect from the moment she walked into my room. You cannot summon support in a crisis if you have not built it over a lifetime. That is not something anyone can shortcut. I also want to tell you what Donna did after she called the patient advocate because I think it matters. She came back to my room on her break, not her shift, her break, her own unpaid time, and she sat with me for 20 minutes. She didn't say very much. She asked how I was holding up. She brought me a cup of hot tea that was actually hot, which is rarer than you would think in a hospital. She said, "In 30 years of nursing, I've seen this play out a dozen different ways. The ones who come out of it are the ones who have their paperwork in order and their people on the phone. You have both." She stood up. She said, "You're going to be fine." And she went back to work. I have sent Donna a Christmas card every year since. This past December, she wrote back and said she had shared my story, changed names, no details, with her own mother, who is 74 and lives alone in Cincinnati. She said her mother updated her, well, the following week. That is the ripple effect of one woman choosing to stand in a doorway and witness. He came back the next morning, alone. Renee was in the hospital cafeteria getting breakfast. Carol had gone to her office to file the first protective documents. The room was quiet, just me, the morning light coming through the window, and my son sitting in the visitor's chair with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor. I had been thinking about this conversation since the day before. I had been thinking about what I wanted to say and what I did not want to say and what I needed him to hear and what I needed him to understand on his own. Because there is a difference between telling a grown man something and giving a grown man the space to arrive at a truth himself, and only one of those things actually takes hold. I said nothing for a long time. I let him sit with it. He was the one who finally spoke. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I said, "Tell me what you were afraid of." He looked up. The question surprised him. He had been expecting something else: anger, accusation, the justified fury of a woman who had been plotted against by her own child. Those things were in me, but they would not have served the moment. He said, "Ashley kept saying you were going to need more and more help as you got older. She said the house was going to become a problem. She said, if you spent everything down and something happened to you, it would fall on us. She said we had to get ahead of it now while we could still manage it cleanly." Manage it cleanly, I repeated. She made it sound like we were being responsible. like we were protecting you by making hard decisions before you became too attached to make them yourself. I said, Leonard, did Ashley ever show you my actual financial documents, my bank statements, my pension records, my will? No. Did she ever suggest that you speak to Dr. Russ directly or call Carol? Or sit down with me and simply ask how I was doing, not how I might need care eventually, but how I was actually doing right now? No. Did you ask her why not? Silence. I said, I want to ask you one question. Take your time before you answer it. When was the last time you made a decision about my life by asking me what I wanted? He pressed his hands over his face. His shoulders moved once. He pulled himself together with the effort of a man who was taught that composure is expected, and then he looked at me with wet eyes and he said, I've made a terrible mistake. I said, yes, you have, but I want you to understand something. A mistake is not the same as a betrayal if you are willing to do the real work of understanding how it happened, not to explain it away, to actually understand it. How Ashley got you to this point, what fears she was feeding. What part of you was willing to believe I needed to be managed rather than respected? He nodded. I said, I need you to think about how long this has been happening, not just the plan you found out about, the pattern, the group chat, the calendar, the way you stopped being in a room alone with me. I need you to look at the last 3 years honestly and tell me what you see. He was quiet for a long time. He said, I see someone slowly moving between us. Yes, I said. I thought she was just organized. I thought she was trying to be helpful. I thought I was being too attached to things being the way they were before. I said, you are allowed to have a relationship with your wife. You are allowed to make a life together and build your own household and your own rhythms. None of that requires you to disappear from your mother, and none of that required what happened yesterday in this room. He said, I know. I said, here is what I need from you now. I need you to decide who you are, not who Ashley needs you to be, not who is convenient in the short term. I need you to decide what kind of son you want to be to a mother who is still here, still capable, still your mother, and then I need you to live that decision consistently, even when it is uncomfortable. He said, I want to be the son you raised. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, then be him. We did not hug that morning. Some things are rebuilt slowly over time, not in a single conversation, but something had shifted between us, something foundational. The wall that had been built up over 3 years, brick by invisible brick, had developed a crack that the light was coming through. That was enough to start with. I also want to say this, for the women watching who have a son in a situation like Leonard's. Your son is not automatically the villain. Leonard was not a cruel man. He was a man who had been slowly and skillfully managed by a woman who understood his particular fears, the fear of being a bad provider, the fear of future financial burden, the fear of conflict, the fear of failing to plan. Ashley had taken those fears and built a framework around them that looked, from the inside, like responsibility, like love even. She had made the exploitation of his mother look like the practical thing, the caring thing, the adult thing. That is manipulation. It is a particular kind that targets people's genuine virtues, their protectiveness, their sense of duty, and warps them into tools. Leonard did not walk into that hospital room as a bad son. He walked in as a man who had not been asking the right questions for long enough. There is a difference. The difference matters. He had a lot of work ahead of him. We both did, but we were going to do it with our eyes open. I want to be very clear about something. What happened next was not dramatic. I did not deliver a speech. There was no public humiliation of Ashley. There were no lawyers facing off in a hallway. What happened was quiet, deliberate, and completely decisive. And it was possible only because of decisions I had made long before any crisis arrived. In 2019, 4 years before the fall, 5 years before that hospital room, Carol Simmons and I had sat down in her office on a Tuesday afternoon. Her brother-in-law had just passed away without any estate planning in place, and the family chaos that followed had shaken both of us. Carol looked at me across her desk and said, Jackie, let's make sure you are never in that position. We spent several hours updating my documents that day. First, my will. My previous will was 12 years old and named Robert as a beneficiary. He had been gone for over 20 years, but the document had never been formally updated. We wrote a current will that clearly named Renee as my primary beneficiary, with specific provisions for the house, the savings account, the contents of the home, and a small educational fund I had set aside for eventual grandchildren. Clear, legal, witnessed, notarized, and filed. Second, a durable power of attorney. This is the document that Ashley's plan had most depended on, or rather, had depended on me not having. A durable power of attorney designates a person who can make legal and financial decisions on your behalf if you are ever incapacitated. The critical word is durable. It remains valid even through periods of temporary incapacity. Carol advised me to designate someone who was not also a primary beneficiary to avoid conflicts of interest. I designated Renee. Ashley's entire strategy had assumed she could establish a competing power of attorney through the incompetency process. But you cannot supersede a current, valid power of attorney without a formal court proceeding and a judge's order, and not without the designated attorney of record being notified. That meant Carol would be in the room. Third, a healthcare directive. My medical wishes clearly documented, who makes health decisions if I cannot, what interventions I want and do not want, where I want to be cared for. In 2019, these felt like paperwork, necessary but not urgent, the kind of thing responsible adults do, like making sure you have smoke detectors and an emergency fund. I filed the copies in my safe and gave Carol the originals, and I did not think about them again for 4 years. In 2023, they became everything. Carol called Columbus Community Federal Credit Union, where I have banked for 30 years, on the morning after the confrontation. She identified herself as my attorney of record. She conveyed my instructions to flag my accounts against any third-party access requests that had not been personally authorized by me in writing, with verification through Carol's office. The credit union had procedures for exactly this situation. A financial exploitation flag was placed on my accounts that same day. Dr. Russ submitted a written statement to my medical file confirming that I was fully mentally competent, oriented to time and person and place, and in her professional opinion showed no indicators of diminished cognitive capacity. The statement explicitly noted that a competency challenge on medical grounds was not supported by her clinical observations. Frank Caldwell sent his documentation to Carol, dates, times, descriptions, Marcus Webb's account of the phone call. Carol sent a formal legal notice to Ashley. The letter stated clearly that any further action directed at my property, finances, or health care without my expressed written consent would constitute elder financial abuse under Ohio Revised Code, which is a serious matter. The letter was sent to Ashley at her home address. It was certified, it was received. The plan that Ashley had spent months building, the facility, the finances, the house, was dismantled in approximately 72 hours. I was discharged from Riverside Methodist Hospital 6 days after surgery, exactly as Dr. Russ had planned. Renee drove me home. We stopped at Greeter's Ice Cream on the way, a Columbus institution, a requirement, and I had black raspberry chip because I always have black raspberry chip, and Renee had dark chocolate chip mint, and we sat in my kitchen at the table where I have eaten 10,000 meals, and we drank coffee and did not talk about Ashley at all. We talked about Renee's garden in Nashville, which was having a good fall. We talked about a novel I had been meaning to read. We talked about whether the hydrangeas would need to be cut back before the first frost. It has been 7 months. I want to tell you where things stand honestly because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve a perfect ending. Leonard and I talk every Sunday. He comes for dinner twice a month. He comes alone, and when he sits across from me at the kitchen table, there is a quality to his presence that was not there before, a directness, a willingness to simply be here without managing the visit. He started seeing a therapist in November. He told me himself, which took courage, and I told him I was proud of him for it. We are not all the way back to where we were before Ashley. But we are building something, and it is built on honesty this time. Ashley does not come to my home. That is my boundary, and it will not change. I am not her enemy, and she is not mine, but I know what she is capable of, and I know what she intended, and my house is my sanctuary, and I choose who enters it. Leonard understands this. He has not pushed back on it. Renee comes up from Nashville every 2 months. She brings vegetables from her garden, the best tomatoes I have ever eaten. I don't know what she does, and she fills this house with enough noise and laughter for 10 people. She knows where every important document is filed. She has the password to my safe. She knows what I want and what I do not want. Frank Caldwell still waves at me over the fence every morning. In February, there was a bad ice storm, and he plowed my driveway without being asked, as he has done every winter for 15 years. I took him a plate of his favorite oatmeal raisin cookies at Christmas. Good neighbors are worth more than most people ever say out loud. Carol and I have lunch on the 3rd Thursday of every month at Lindy's in German Village. She gets the salmon, I get the chicken. We have done this for 38 years, and I hope we do it for 38 more. My hip healed well. I walk 2 miles every morning, down Elmwood Drive and around the park and back, and I feel Robert walking with me sometimes, the way I always do when the light is good and the air is cold and the morning is quiet. It is a good feeling, not sad, just full. I think about what my mother used to say. She would say, "Dorothy, a woman who owns her own front door owns herself." She was talking about the house, yes, but she meant more than the house. She meant the right to decide who comes in and who does not. the right to sit in your own kitchen and not apologize for being there, the right to a life that belongs to you fully, completely, without condition. My mother never went to college. She never had a career. By the standards the world uses to measure women, she would not have been considered remarkable, but she understood something that takes some people a lifetime to learn. That a woman who knows what she is worth cannot be talked out of it, not by a smooth voice, not by a manila folder, not by the word incompetent spoken in a hospital room by someone who wants what she has. I learned that from her. I hope I have passed it on. Now I want to talk directly to you. If you are over 65 and you are watching this, I need you to hear what I am about to say as carefully as you heard any part of the story, because this is the part that matters most. What happened to me is not unusual. The National Council on Aging reports that financial exploitation is the most common form of elder abuse in the United States, and that in the majority of cases, it is perpetrated by a family member. Not a stranger, not a phone scammer, someone the older person loved and trusted and would never have suspected. The people most vulnerable are women, widows, women who live alone. Women who spent their lives taking care of everyone else and now, in their later years, are surrounded by people who have begun to see their home and their savings as an asset to be captured. I am not telling you this to make you afraid of your family. Most families are not like this, but I am telling you this because the women who are harmed by it are the ones who were not prepared, and preparation is within your reach. Right now, before any crisis arrives, here is what I had in place that protected me. I had an updated will. If your will is more than 5 years old, or if it names someone who has passed, or if your life circumstances have changed significantly since you wrote it, call an attorney and update it. It does not have to be complicated. It simply has to be current, witnessed, and notarized, and the people you trust should know where it is. I had a durable power of attorney assigned to the right person. This is perhaps the most important document a woman in her 60s or 70s can have. Choose someone whose loyalty is entirely to you, not someone who stands to gain financially from your estate, and not someone who can be influenced by your other family members. Have an attorney draw it up, keep the original on file, make sure your chosen person knows they have it and knows what it means. I had a relationship with my bank. My bank knew me. When Carol called, they responded quickly. Walk into your bank branch and speak to a manager in person. Ask about elder financial protection protocols. Ask what their process is if someone attempts to add themselves to your account without your authorization. Know your rights as the account holder. You have more protection available to you than most people realize, but you have to ask for it. I had a doctor who knew me over time. Dr. Russ had years of records showing my cognitive health clearly. That documentation was my defense against a false incompetency claim. Keep your annual appointments. Build a relationship with a doctor who knows you as a person. Your medical history is evidence. I had people outside my immediate family who were paying attention. Frank, Carol, Donna, Renee, they were my witnesses and my support network. Isolation is the primary tool of elder financial abusers. They reduce outside contact gradually, over months or years, until the person has no one left to call. Protect your friendships. Stay connected to your community. Tell the people you trust what is happening in your life. And finally, trust your own perception. When something feels wrong, when a pattern feels off, when a relationship begins steering you away from other people you love, that feeling is information. You are allowed to take your own instincts seriously. You do not need a lawyer present to ask a direct question or notice a concerning pattern. The wisdom that comes from 7 decades of watching people and navigating life is real. Do not let anyone convince you that you are imagining things. One more thing on the subject of the law, because I know some of you are thinking, what if I can't afford an attorney? I want you to know that legal help for elder issues does not always cost money. Every state has a legal aid organization that provides free services to qualifying individuals. The Eldercare Locator, which you can find at eldercare.acl.gov or by calling 1-800-677-1116, connects you to local resources in your area at no cost. Your local area agency on aging, there is one in every county in this country, can point you toward free or low-cost legal clinics specifically for seniors. AARP also offers legal resources and a helpline. You do not have to face this alone, and you do not have to face it without guidance, regardless of your income. If you suspect that someone is already attempting to exploit you financially, if accounts have been accessed without your knowledge, if you have been pressured to sign documents you did not understand, if someone has been isolating you from friends and family, you can call the National Elder Fraud Hotline at 1-800-33-FRAUD-11. It is free, it is confidential, and the people on the other end of that line are there specifically to help you. These resources exist because what happened to me happens to thousands of women every year. You are not alone in this. And you are not powerless. I want to end with something personal. We live in a world that often treats older women as though their best days are behind them, as though the decades of work and sacrifice and survival have somehow diminished them rather than made them formidable. As though the appropriate posture for a woman past a certain age is one of gratitude for being tolerated, compliance with whoever has decided to manage her affairs, and the graceful surrender of the life she built. That is a lie. And I am living proof of it. The woman who stood in front of 36th graders for 31 years and gave them everything she had, she did not disappear. She grew. She learned what she was made of through grief and difficulty, and the long, ordinary heroism of showing up every single day. She paid off her house and raised her children and built friendships that have lasted 40 years. She was there. She is here. She's sitting in her yellow chair by the kitchen window with her coffee, watching the morning light come in, entirely in possession of herself and her life. That woman is not done. Neither are you. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what you are taking away from Jackie's story. And please subscribe, because this channel exists for you, for every woman who has been told she has no say, who has been managed and minimized and talked over and underestimated. Real women, real boundaries. The quiet strength it takes to protect what matters. I will see you in the next one. There is one more thing I want to say before I go. I have thought a great deal in these 7 months about the word incompetent, about who gets to use that word and why, and what it is actually designed to do. When Ashley used that word in my hospital room, she was not making a medical observation. She was making a strategic one, because in our society, the word incompetent, when applied to an older woman, functions as a kind of erasure. It says this person's perceptions cannot be trusted. This person's preferences don't need to be honored. This person's history, her wisdom, her 31 years of standing in front of children and shaping minds, her paid-off house and her careful savings and her decades of showing up, none of that counts anymore. She is incompetent. She can be managed. I want you to hear this clearly. That word is a weapon, and it is most often aimed at women who are too old to be useful in the ways that our culture values, but still in possession of things that other people want. Do not let anyone aim it at you without fighting back with everything you have: your financial documents, your doctor's records, your relationships, your voice, and do not wait for a crisis to build your defenses. The time to protect yourself is not after someone walks in with a manila folder. The time to protect yourself is a quiet Tuesday afternoon in your attorney's office, before anything has gone wrong, when there is no urgency and no fear, and you can think clearly and act deliberately. That Tuesday afternoon is the most powerful thing in this entire story, not the recording, not the confrontation. The Tuesday afternoon in 2019 when Carol and I updated my paperwork is what saved me. Everything else was just the moment it proved its worth. If you have not had that Tuesday afternoon yet, please call someone you trust, call an attorney. Call your local area agency on aging, which is a free resource available in every county in the United States and which can connect you with legal aid, financial counseling, and elder abuse prevention resources at no cost. You built your life. You deserve to finish it on your own terms. And you deserve to finish it surrounded by people who see you clearly, not as a problem to be solved, not as an asset to be captured, but as the full and irreplaceable human being you have always been every single day of your remarkable life. Never forget that. Real women, real boundaries. The quiet strength it takes to protect what matters.